Steve Anderson. What do you know about the Jeff Bezos letters to shareholders, to the stockholder that he's published? I think his last one was 2019 or 2020. What Steve has done is compiled them all and wrote a book. He's from the insurance industry. He deals with a lot of tech with insurance agents as well. But just the principles, I start off the conversation with customer obsession, how Amazon thrives on that. Whether you're a fan or not, there are three kind of pillars: wide selection, low pricing, fast delivery. I mean, whether you're a fan or not, you must agree that it's even better now. But we go into those, we go more into customer obsession about who the customer is. They have the attitude the customer comes first. They only spend money on the customer. Very, very, what would seem to be just a typical, reasonable way, but Amazon just brings it to a different level. We also talk about risk and what Bezos says about risk and how managers have to engage in it. There's these two types. There's one-way doors and two-way doors. Believe it or not, pizza plays a large role on group size. You'll learn about that as well. But just a great conversation about, how I work with a lot of small to medium businesses and how they can benefit from the lessons learned at Amazon with Jeff Bezos and how he brought those principles and ideas to Blue Origin as well. Great conversation with Steve Anderson. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family, in their passion, in their careers, and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Get this going, Steve Anderson. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thanks so much for your time. Did Jeff Bezos invent customer obsession?
I think business owners have known that they needed to be pay attention to their customers. But I have to say, in my, I guess, many years now, it's the first time I heard someone describe it as obsession. And that's actually one of the early things that really just intrigued me about him, Bezos, and about Amazon, and that certainly in the very beginning, that what do I call it? Fanatical focus on customers, and it just permeates everything that Amazon does, even today. And I would say certainly over time, maybe some things have changed a little bit, but customer obsession, and that phrase came first that I saw it in his very first shareholder letter in 1997. And there were several sections there that he outlined what he and thus Amazon would be focusing on in the future. And one of those was customer obsession. And it's worked itself out in a number of different ways. We start with the customer and work backwards. We understand the customer's wants, needs, and desires so deeply that we can invent on their behalf. So those are just some phrases that continue to show up, certainly in Bezos' writings through the shareholder letters and in the activities and thought process at Amazon. That was a longer answer. You got to cut me. You got to cut me off.
Never. I love it. But he says that the employees should wake up in the morning fearing the customer.
Yes.
So you said mentioned that in the book.
Yes. Because he adds a bit to that, saying customers are fickle and they will immediately go to something else that they perceive is better, easier, lower priced. So customers, fear customers, not competitors, is kind of
Mm.
what the context is. Don't worry about as much about what
Hmm.
competitors are doing, but what customers are doing. So, yes, that is again another, and that's again part of that obsession
The culture.
with customers.
Yeah.
And I have to say again, pretty much any business owner knows or understands that they've got to pay attention to the customer. I think what's interesting about the word obsession is it has some negative
Sure.
connotations, right? I mean, can you be too obsessed?
Right.
Or we use, they're so obsessed with that as a negative, and he has taken that and made it a positive. And in the culture at Amazon, I mean, they really do. Their customer research is deep, not just wide. And in fact, he says other places that you can't ask the customer what they want. They don't know what they want until they know they can get it. But
Mm.
if we understand their problems, their pain points, their friction points, we can invent new things, new ways to interact with them. And when you do that, you create a customer that's more loyal or will stay with you longer. And you can't stop. And I would say that's kind of one of the key ideas is so many businesses have some great ideas. They invent new things. They help customers and then they get successful and they continue to focus on what got them there, not what's next. Um, and, and, and that was really one of the things that certainly with Amazon really intrigued me as I was even looking and researching other companies. And ones that have been very successful in the past and are no longer here. And what's the difference? Why?
Mm.
What's the difference between an Amazon and a um, Sears or a Blockbuster or a BlackBerry or I mean any of the names kind of are we know now as once very successful and then gone. Um, so that's some of the background that started intriguing me, and I started researching deeper, which resulted in the shareholder letters in the book and the ideas that are in the book.
Yeah, focus on your customer, not your competitor. I know so many. I'm in the tech industry. I know you're in insurance,
Yes,
and I just know so many companies that focus so much on their competitors. Just focus on your on your customer. And the three pillars of his service, of course, business service is wide selection, low pricing, and fast delivery.
yes,
One thing Amazon does best are those three. That's for sure. To this day, to this
yeah,
minute.
yeah, and it's better today than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And they so that's that idea of continuing to focus on the customer and those three pillars in terms of and Bezos says in one of his letters, I can't imagine that our customer will ever want higher prices, less selection, and slower delivery. So that's and I also have to say, I mean, there's a lot going on right now around Amazon and the antitrust and
Mm.
how they treat employees, and I mean, there's lots of questions there, and I don't know that people understand enough their, can I call it maniacal focus, obsessive focus on the customer in all those areas. And I think there are potentially some negative impacts, and I think Amazon's trying to address those, like fast delivery. Well, what does that take? Well, that means people in the warehouses that are pulling stuff off the shelf, putting them in boxes, getting it out the door, getting it on a truck, getting it to that front porch. They're continually pushing to do that faster. And they're automating a lot of that, and the human element there really is there. And I believe, I know a lot of people don't, but I believe that Amazon really is focused on employees. In fact, in that first 1997 letter, Bezos calls out that employees are key to our success. We need them in all the different areas, at Amazon. So,
See, another interesting point that you brought out, and I hear, very successful people. Like I know, like Quentin Tarantino always says, I make movies for myself that
mhm.
I like, and then others can come and join. Rick Rubin, the famous, record producer, says the same thing. I'm with artists, and I what I like comes first. The listener comes second, comes last almost. And you just said, don't ask the customer what they want because they don't know what they want until they get it. Isn't that a bit counterintuitive to customer comes first though?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I wonder if those examples of more creative
Hmm.
versus more product or
Interesting.
platform might be some of that difference.
Hmm.
Um, and and that's an interesting question. I probably would have to ponder that a little bit, but I think there might be something, a movie, right, or music, or um, more create, a book,
Hmm.
right? Some, writing, some of the more creative, you do it for yourself, and either create an audience or you have an audience, but it's more what you want or what you think. So, I mean, I didn't, in my book, I did not. I think I interviewed maybe three people from Amazon. Um, and it was more of a specific decision. I'm an outsider. I've not worked at Amazon, right? I studied the shareholder letters and lots of other material, but I was trying to come at this from an outsider's view. Here's what
Hmm.
anybody can learn about Amazon. Um, so that I say is more creative versus uh, creating a product, platform, or service for a customer I've identified that might need it.
Hmm.
I'm wondering if that's some of that difference.
Yeah, because he says the questions that Amazon always asks: who's the customer? What's their problem? What's the most important customer benefit? How do you know what the customer needs, and what does the customer experience look like? So it's got these five essential questions that really have to be answered when they're creating these services.
Yes. And again, that whole idea of, it's called working backwards at Amazon.
Mm,
It's it's starting with the customer and working backwards, meaning, okay, so customers have said and have embraced fast delivery. Okay, we know that. But working backwards, what does that mean? Where are the friction points? Well, early on, we can talk about Prime, free 2-day delivery.
yeah.
Crazy, actually. And senior leadership team at Amazon pushed back on it pretty hard,
Right.
meaning, how can we afford to do that? And one of the responses that Bezos had was, if it's better for the customer, it will be better for Amazon eventually. And they experimented, they iterated, they tried different things. In fact, Amazon Prime was their third attempt at faster delivery.
Wow.
And you see that over and over again at Amazon. And this is again a key kind of cultural mindset, is experimentation, which allows invention. Um, and so experimentation creates inventions, which allows innovation. And I think
Hmm.
that's why, kind of earlier comment, that's where the tech industry maybe have it backwards.
Interesting.
They try and innovate, but is invention more important than innovation?
Mm.
And you can innovate yourself out of business. because all you're doing is increment. So what is innovation? I mean, it's incremental improvements on something already there. It's
Mm.
not inventing something new that customers, and think about, again, Amazon. How many different businesses have they created? Certainly retail, everything store
Yeah.
first. They had a problem internally with getting computing and programming done fast enough because all their different areas were doing their own thing. They were building their own databases, they were building their own infrastructure.
Mm.
Bezos said, that's crazy. We're going to build the basics that everybody taps into. We don't need to recreate a database for every different part of Amazon. Well, at some point, they realized there could be other businesses that might want this kind of
Huh.
infrastructure. And so AWS was born.
US.
But
Yeah.
AWS was born out of an Amazon problem that then they realized could change compute, right? Sounds like you've been around long enough to know, you know, what did it take a startup tech company 25 years ago? Millions of dollars, servers, all they had to do all that themselves,
Yeah.
build the database, and they may have tools, but they had to build all of that versus now, what, couple grand, 5 grand, maybe 10.
Right.
AWS, all the compute capacity you need, and you don't have to manage that. In fact, you're probably not very good at it. And Amazon has become really good at it. So that's one example. Another kind of more current example is logistics. So again, think about all that delivery infrastructure that
Yeah.
Amazon has built. That now is logistics as a service, meaning third party sellers put their stuff in Amazon's warehouse. Amazon picks it, packs it, ships it, 2 day free delivery for Prime. They created a way for any business to not have to build out all of that.
Hmm.
And again, that's an interesting way of looking at
Wow.
how business can be done today versus in the past.
It's just the inventions or the innovations just continue. I didn't realize Amazon Web Services (AWS) that was the source. They had to deal with it internally.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, that is, oh my goodness. And then logistics, and just they also invented free shipping. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember when I was just buying books from him when he was in his garage back in,
Yep.
I don't know, late '90s, I think.
Late
And
90s. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and and then all of a sudden I started noticing on the site he had like shovels and other things. I said, "Oh wow, there's some other stuff here." And it would take 3 or 4 days to get there, and then it just kept on going. Let's talk about the Kindle. You can
Yes.
read any book in the world within 60 seconds. Wasn't that kind of the mission?
That was the mission. And again, part of, they weren't the first with an e reader, and they invented a new way because the previous, again, think about the customer friction.
Yeah.
Before, you had to plug the e reader into a computer and download the book.
Hmm.
So you're right. The mission of Kindle was any book, you can start reading any book in 60 seconds or less. So they built in Wi Fi into the Kindle.
That's right.
You
Whisper.
didn't have to be tethered to anything.
Yeah.
They built the infrastructure and then they kept improving it. I mean, to me, WhisperSync is an amazing technology.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've just been reading some books, and I have multiple places that I might read them. And Amazon knows where the furthest page I've read is.
Yeah.
And it automatically asks me if I want to go there. I mean, think of that from a technology standpoint, all those different instances, and I could have a device not connected to the internet for weeks. Amazon needs to understand that and be able to know which is the right version of the book and where I am. I mean, it's just people don't. I mean, people like us think about that. I don't think
Mm.
people care, except that they can pick up exactly where they left off on any device.
And Echo with Alexa, another
Yep.
huge, just people forget where all this came from.
Yeah. Well, and I would say the Echo device came out of a failure. So one of my first principles in the book is encourage successful failure.
Hmm.
Because if you're going to, what Bezos says is if you're going to experiment, you're going to fail. Because if you experiment and don't fail, it's not an experiment. And in fact, most experiments fail. But you have to be willing as a business to endure the, the pain of failure to get to the success. Here's the example. Do you remember Amazon's phone,
Ah, the fire.
the
Yeah.
Fire phone? So announced 2014, iPhone was already out, Android was already out. Who needed another phone? But it was Jeff Bezos' pet project, so he was pushing it, and he was trying to design a better phone experience. Unfortunately, primarily a better shopping experience on your phone on Amazon.
Right.
Okay, so I think that might have been the first disconnect. Utter failure. Wrote off $280 million in development and inventory costs into 2014. But what came out of all of that, again, phone, they had to understand voice processing and write all those kinds of things, is the Echo. I mean, actually, a few months after the phone was announced, Bezos got his first demonstration of this cylinder device that could sit on the table and respond to you. And again, really interesting. That device certainly has become quite popular. And again, they're continuing to iterate that. It's rumored, at least, that they're working on a more AI powered Echo Alexa pair. We'll see. We'll see. And I would say it's at some level, the Echo Alexa has been a failure because it hasn't produced the sales or the income I think they expected.
Interesting.
Um, and they've been spending literally billions of dollars on those devices. So they're continuing to try and figure out, okay, how can we make this a viable, profitable device, not just something fun for people to use?
Hmm. So, Steve, we got to talk about risk now because his my God, his attitude, his I just it's so different from anything I've ever read. He lets his managers take risk, but there's certain milestones that they have to, address. He has these two types. These one way doors and two-way doors. What's the
Yep.
difference there?
So a couple thoughts there. I'm going to break that down a little bit.
Please.
So the whole idea of risk taking is what's kind of undergirding the idea of successful failure,
Hmm.
because every experiment you do has a risk to it. And that's what really attracted me when I started looking at the letters. As you said, I've been in the insurance industry a very long time,
Yeah.
and everything about insurance is to mitigate risk,
Mm.
transfer risk to a
Mm.
policy,
Mm.
reduce risk. I mean, that's everything we do. So really counterintuitive when I started asking the question, is the biggest risk businesses face not taking enough risk?
Hmm.
And so that was, again, a kind of an undergirding mindset or thought or question that led me originally into doing more research there. Now, what you mentioned, the one way and two way doors, is another principle, which is high velocity decision making. And so, one of the problems that successful businesses have, certainly as they grow and scale, is they tend to add bureaucracy.
Hmm.
They tend to add managers. They
Hmm.
tend to add supervisors. They tend to add divisions. They
Hmm.
tend to add, and all those levels now require somebody with an idea that may or may not be any good. They don't know till they test it, but they have to go through multiple layers. And what Bezos said is one of the ways to reduce that, Actually, a couple ways to reduce them, now that I think about it. One is you hire high quality people who know what they're doing. Two, you give them the authority to make decisions within the scope of what their skill set is, what they can do. And so when he describes decision making, again, one way doors are decisions that are what I call bet the farm decisions for a company,
Mm.
meaning hard to reverse, hard to change, hard to pivot. They're kind of final. And I would say maybe one of those for Amazon was when they were looking at building a second headquarters. So started in Seattle, expanded there. They wanted a second headquarters, and they had a contest between cities and right all that. I won't go into all of that, um, but that's a tough decision and hard to change once you make it,
Mm.
because now you're building buildings.
Mhm.
I mean, you're committed. He says those decisions should be made slowly, with as much information as you can gather, and ultimately with a gut intuition. And those should be made by a few people, not a lot of people.
Hmm.
But those types of decisions are rare in a company,
Right.
even a startup. I mean, they may have more, but they're not always bet the farm. And again, maybe a little variation there. But type 2 doors are reversible. And that's where the team who's responsible for a project is given the authority to make those decisions. Now, they have accountability for those decisions, and they may be questioned about how they made it, why they made it, those kinds of things. The difference is those decisions are much easier to reverse or pivot.
Hmm.
And if you're making those at the lowest level capable of making those kinds of decisions, you naturally speed up decision making, which means you speed up experimentation, invention, and innovation.
Hmm.
And that's how you keep, as a company, not sliding into, again, a Bezos term, a day two company,
Hmm.
not a day one company. And so they have tools they built at Amazon to help with that process. So I think one of the most fascinating tools is what's originally called the 6-page memo. Today, it's more referred to as the working backward document. So when decisions are being made, so I'm somebody who has a great idea for something Amazon should do. I want to get approval to move forward with this project. I'm responsible, my team is responsible for writing a memo, a physical, written, on paper memo. The first page typically is what's called a future press release. The actual press release that will go out the day this product is announced. And then an FAQ. What are all the questions that the team has wrestled with and somebody looking at this project might need to know the answers to before they can approve it? And then there might be some data, some other kind of backup material in that. That started in 2004 when Bezos sent a memo around to the senior leadership team, small number of people, and said, no longer will any slide-oriented presentation be allowed in a meeting.
Right. No slides.
No PowerPoint, no keynote, whatever it was, no slides. Because he says what happens with those slide-oriented presentations is people can hide behind them.
Hmm.
And it allows lazy thinking. If you have to write it out, you have to think it through versus a bullet point. And he said it also makes meetings what's the word I want? I'm better, faster,
Efficient.
efficient. That's a good word for it. Makes the meetings much more efficient. So those memos are not sent out beforehand, before the meeting. They're handed out at the meeting. Because
Right.
what Bezos says is executives are busy. They say they're going to read them and they don't.
Right.
So we take the first 10, 15, maybe 20, maybe 30 minutes of the meeting. Everybody reads the same thing at the same time.
At the same
They're
time.
making notes of additional questions or comments, etc. And then the meeting's open up for discussion. Now, so that's the theory. So I co-founded a new company. Long story, we can talk about it later. 5 years ago now, I was pitching investors to invest in this particular company. It's insurance industry related and technology consulting. And I used the 6-page memo idea to pitch. There was a room of about 15 state association executives that we were pitching this to. We wanted them to invest in this new startup as a way to help their members with technology. And it took a couple of weeks easy to write this memo. And I handed it out, and the next probably 20 minutes was excruciating.
Hmm.
Because what are they thinking? They're reading through it. Oh, what notes are they writing? What didn't I figure out? Right. I mean, and when I opened it up for discussion, there was an amazing discussion because everybody already knew what I thought. I might have needed to clarify a few things, et cetera, et cetera, and ended up getting 7 investors.
Hmm.
And so, people think about this, and it's really hard, but it's harder. Again, here's what Bezos says. Too often, projects get approved and go along a path, and you get to some point where you realize the project isn't going to work. Would you rather know that sooner than later?
Mm.
And by having to lay out and even lay out, here's what we know, here's what we think we don't know, here's the skills we already have, here are skills we don't have that we're going to need. We're going to have to hire somebody, like the Echo. We're going to have to hire people who understand voice and sound and processing and all those kinds of things. We don't have those skills here internally. But knowing that up front becomes, again, it's the idea of slowing down to speed up.
Hmm.
Because now you're not wasting time. And if it fails, here's the even maybe better part. If that project doesn't work, you now have a document to go back and ask why.
Hmm.
What did we miss? What should have we asked that we didn't ask? What information should have we gathered that we didn't gather?
Mm.
And now you are iterating and learning the next time. So I'll pause there. That's a lot.
Yeah, I I don't know if I have this wrong, Steve, but in reading his book, I thought I remember him saying something about the decision maker has to have a certain percent of
Yes,
uh, data
information.
before information before they can make a decision. And if they reach that threshold, if it fails, there will not be,
Right.
ramifications. Do you
That's
remember what
correct.
that number was?
70%.
Yeah, it's 70%.
So, what he said was for those type 2 decisions, those reversible decisions, you should get remember I said as much information as you can for type 1. The
Mm,
difference is type 2, at most you should have 70% of the information. Here's the key phrase: you wish you had
mm,
to move forward, because you're never going to have all the information.
right.
So you're better off starting, learning, iterating, figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and then being willing to adjust, either pivot a different direction or stop. And you've seen that recently with Amazon. They experimented with physical retail stores, bookstores,
Yeah.
four-star stores, even the grocery stores. And they recently closed all bookstores, all four-star stores.
Did they?
Yeah, they weren't giving the return that they expected. Was that a failure? Absolutely. Does that mean they're not committed to physical retail? Probably not. But they're putting their efforts. My view is they're putting their efforts now into grocery. Grocery is a huge market
Hmm.
that they have a very tiny percentage of, and they see lots of opportunity there to expand and grow. Certainly with their Whole Foods acquisition,
No.
that's part of that, but even with their Amazon Fresh stores, et cetera. And thinking, again, back to customer obsession, thinking differently about the grocery shopping experience and how
Hmm.
can they improve that for customers.
My other big takeaway from his book is that the um, team size and related to pizza.
Yes. So that decision team should be small, and the way they describe it is a two pizza team. So typically 10 to 12 people, two large pizzas can feed at one time.
Right.
That's the size of a team. Now, on a big project like the Kindle, you may have a couple hundred of those teams, each responsible for a particular aspect of that
I
project.
see.
And then the leader of that team is the accountability person. He's responsible for what happens in the team back up to others that are kind of managing the whole project, et cetera. But and again, I go back to one of the keys there is hiring the right people and the best people, not just people to fill the position. And if you hire good people, you should trust them for what they're skilled at.
I opened up the conversation with, did Bezos invent customer obsession? It seems some of these things just seem so logical. This just seems so. I mean, Amazon is such a remarkable company for what they've done, and they've had their failures, and they've been able to turn them around, and they've had such great successes. You mentioned the 14 Amazon leadership principles, and a customer obsession, ownership. We talked about a lot of these.
Yes.
Invent and simplify, are right a lot. Learn and be curious, hire and develop the best, insist on highest standards, think big, bias for action, frugality, which is really interesting.
Yes. Um, and again, the frugality leadership principle, and I want to make a distinction here. So, mine are growth principles. Those are leadership principles that have
Right.
developed over time at Amazon. But the frugality one is really interesting in that typically Amazon doesn't spend money on things that don't improve the customer experience.
Mm,
And, you could argue a little bit whether that's good or bad long term, but like airplane coach tickets, not first class tickets, because why spend the money? And one of the early examples of that was the door desk. So early on, you mentioned in the garage, getting books from the warehouses around Seattle, packaging them up, taking them to the post office. Well, all of that packaging process was happening originally in the garage, and then they moved to their first building in Seattle. But at one point, Bezos said, I was on my knees putting books into packages, and I commented to the person I was working with that my knees are killing me. We need to get knee pads. And the other person commented, we don't need knee pads, we need tables.
mm.
And so they went to, I don't remember which, but a Home Depot, Lowe's, store, hardware store, lumber store, bought four by fours and a solid core door. They attached the four by fours as legs to the doors, and they became known as door desks. And Amazon had one of those in his office. I don't know if he still does, but for years. You can see pictures of it and all of those. And what's that a symbol of? We spend money on customers, not on
Mm,
Amazon.
mm.
And it's a really interesting cultural reminder to people that customers come first, right? So it's just reinforcing that culture at Amazon of what's important and reinforcing those leadership principles.
Yeah, you mentioned a really good point. I know vendors that work with Amazon, UPS store, and some other people that sell through, and they don't have the most favorable experience,
Right.
right? Because Amazon, like you say, does not spend money on them; they spend it on the customer. It's very interesting. Deflection there in its frugality leadership principle.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And again, with third-party sellers, so the marketplace, that's a whole nother story how that
Mm,
grew. But there is continual questions, about how Amazon treats those third-party sellers, et cetera.
mm,
Um, and those third-party sellers are held to as high a standard as Amazon has, meaning customer has a problem, you take care of it. 2-day shipping. I mean, all of those kinds of things. And Amazon will not hesitate to kick a third party seller out of the marketplace if they don't follow the guidelines.
they comply, yeah, and
Yeah,
they can't advertise a price that's less expensive than what they're doing on Amazon.
right. Yep.
These
And you
kinds
can
of
argue whether that's good or bad.
right,
But again, it's and I always kind of question how would these third party sellers sell without Amazon?
right.
They could.
That infrastructure, yeah.
They could have their own website. They could have their own warehouses. They could do all of that. But for me, why would I want to build all of that and all the money that I would have to spend to do that versus piggybacking on Amazon's infrastructure? And I think that's again another mindset of Bezos is that he really believes in building infrastructure.
Hmm.
So, for example, he said, I think in the 98 letter, was talking about how Amazon was able to start. He said, I didn't have to build the Postal Service or UPS, it was already there to deliver packages.
Mm.
I didn't have to create credit cards.
Hmm.
They were already there. Now, what we did is we allowed people to pay online and store their information so they didn't have to enter it every
Mm.
time. So
Mm.
we helped there. We didn't have to invent the infrastructure. We didn't have to invent the web, the internet.
Mm.
It was there. We were able to tap into that. And so he thinks a lot about that. And kind of the corollary that I'll make the connection with is his space venture, which is Blue Origin.
Yeah.
And he started that in the early 2000s. So again, very much a space person, I guess I would say.
Hmm.
In fact, he was valedictorian of a senior class in high school in Miami, and his valedictorian speech was talking about how in the future industry will be in space and the Earth will become a national park.
Hmm.
So, I mean, think about that, which also illustrates another principle, which is long term thinking. But my point in saying that is Blue Origin's focused on building the infrastructure for getting to space. So, and as he said, so that a college kid could build a space company in his dorm room because he didn't have to build the infrastructure.
Wow.
So again, long-term thinking and that idea of infrastructure. Even if you look at Amazon, all that they've done, even the marketplace third-party sellers, another crazy idea, but they had already built the infrastructure for delivery, as I mentioned earlier, the logistics as a service, now allowing third-party sellers. And again, think about this as a business. Amazon is allowing their competitors on their site.
Hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Right.
And again, I've said similar thing before. What Bezos said is, if a third-party seller has inventory that we don't have, that's better for the customer.
Hmm.
The third-party seller has pricing better than we have, that's better for the customer,
Hmm.
which will ultimately be better for Amazon.
Hmm.
And Amazon makes a fee, a money on those third-party sellers for those services.
Of course. for all that infrastructure. The
Yeah.
remaining leadership principles: earn trust, dive deep, deliver results. And the one I want to talk to you about is have backbone, disagree, and commit. Boy, you could tell it's come out of probably some pretty angry meetings, right?
Yes. Yes. Um, Let me give you the example Bezos gives for talking about that. So Amazon Prime, we know that it added video at some point later, right? Because they were building out services. And Bezos describes being at a meeting, talking about a new show that they were thinking about green lighting to develop and have as a Amazon original show. And Bezos said, I didn't think it was going to be successful. I didn't think it was good enough. Those weren't his words, those were mine. I didn't think it would work. Is what he said. But I told the team that. And I also said, I hired you for your expertise. If you think it will work, I disagree and fully commit to supporting you if you decide to go forward.
Hmm.
And he goes on to explain how much time would have been wasted by the team trying to convince me they were right. And again, if we go back to that decision making, if it doesn't work, what happens? You maybe lost some money, you cancel it.
Hmm.
It's not irreversible. And you waste time trying to convince people. And if you disagree, have the backbone to say something. So he says, kind of social, niceness doesn't fit when you're making decisions. And that's probably a little stronger than what he would say now. And if you disagree, you need to say so and be willing to have it be awkward.
Hmm.
I think that's probably the point that I get out of that.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating the way I didn't realize he was valedictorian. I didn't realize he was from Miami. It makes sense.
Well, and if you even now, people are talking. He's moving to Miami out of Washington because of the estate taxes, and I'm sure that's part of it. But he grew up in Miami. His again, long story about him, but his dad is immigrated from Cuba when he was 16 with like nothing. And built, and a fascinating story of his family. His mom had him when he was 17 in high school, and his grandfather was a significant influence in his life. So anyway, long story there, but just some really interesting kind of background, and he's really smart.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah. So, I started my business, Steve, in the 90s, and I was working way too hard. I told you I'm in the tech field, and I wasn't paying, 14-hour days. You're more than familiar with, and I'm sure Jeff Bezos was, and wasn't paying attention to my nutrition, was eating poorly, late nights, pizza, soda. I got myself up to 340 pounds without even noticing. Doctor said to me, if I don't lose the weight, I'm going to not see my daughter graduate. She was born. So people always ask me, I lost about 130 pounds in about 7 months. People always ask me how, and I just say discipline. So I've got two questions for you, Steve. One, how do you think discipline plays a role in Jeff Bezos' life? And then, of course, yours.
I'll do Jeff Bezos first.
Yeah.
Certainly in those early years, there were a lot of problems at Amazon. I mean, think about the .com bust, right? You remember that.
Sure.
Early 2000s, the internet, and basically if you had a .com on your name, you got, millions of dollars.
Huge.
Amazon survived that because of discipline and financial discipline, and and partly luck, I would say, but they had just raised some additional money and had gotten a pretty big loan to carry them through some of those dry years, and discipline of how the money was spent. But think about frugality. That takes discipline, doesn't it? It's really easy to go, oh, my comforts, I need to be fresh for the meeting I'm going to. So I need first class. So I think discipline goes through all of that.
Hmm.
I also mentioned long term thinking. I think that's where discipline really comes. Meaning, if I'm thinking about building infrastructure for sending industry to space, I have to be disciplined all along the way. And you see that at Blue Origin, a lot. Um, and I would say, so I mentioned his grandfather. His grandfather had a farm in West Texas, which is why Blue Origin's headquartered there, or at least their launch site is there. And he spent the summers at his grandfather's farm from 6 to 16, so about 10 years. And I think one of the things he learned there was certainly discipline, because it was in the middle of nowhere, so they couldn't run to the store to do something. They had to figure out how to do it
Hmm.
on their own ingenuity. And I think that was discipline, that was that creating that mindset of invention. I think there are a number of things that came out of that experience. For me,
Yes, you, Steve Anderson.
um, I'll start with the book. So the book, I never started out to write a book. I actually I've been kind of doing tech consulting for insurance agents for a long time. As I mentioned, started asking the questions about technology being developing so fast, and agents not keeping up, and all those kinds of things. Came across the shareholder letters. My first kind of attempt or iteration was what I called an executive summary, 1 page per letter published at that time. And so I put that together. I actually showed it to my wife. I'm going to give it away as a lead gen, right? Here's some really great ideas that you might be able to use in your agency. Give me your email address, blah, blah. Showed it to my wife, who happened to be in the book publishing business, and she said, "This is not a white paper, this is a book."
Hmm.
And I went, "Oh shit, I don't know how to write a book." So I would say that started a journey that took significant discipline to
Hmm.
finish.
Hmm.
The writing, the editing, the the ideation, the what is this going to look like, and fortunately, my wife is also a fabulous editor, so she helped, which is why her name's on the book a lot, I would say. Um, but that was probably an 18-month process
Wow.
that many times I was ready to give up. So I think that I think a couple things: having the goal in mind, um, creating short-term goal, like literally daily goals of I'm going to write for 30 minutes or whatever hour or whatever. Carve out that time, have the discipline not to get pulled into anything else, but actually to do it. Um, and at least with the book, the results have been pretty good, if I may say. I mean, it's been
Yeah.
translated into 20 languages, bestseller lists, international. I mean, the book continues to sell worldwide. It's just really um, encouraging, I guess, for all that work to have impact.
Hmm.
And that ultimately was my ultimate goal. So, and then discipline throughout my career. I mean, I could give you examples after examples, but having a goal, breaking it down, and committing to the next step that needs to happen to achieve that goal.
Takes discipline.
You have to do it.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
What motivates you, Steve Anderson?
um, I, two things immediately come to mind. I don't know if you've heard of the why assessment, why you do what you do. It's a really interesting one. If not, I don't remember the website. I don't know. But in that assessment, um, it tags me as better way.
Hmm.
So the way I'm built is always looking for a better way to do something. How can I improve something? And that certainly has been my focus on the tech consulting side with insurance agents. I'm always looking at what's next. How can agents use this? How can it improve what they do or streamline what they do? So I think that's one of them. I think the other piece to it is um, I would say a bit of legacy. So I don't, you may be able to tell I'm toward the other end of my career
Hmm.
now. I'm not quite sure what retirement looks like, but by now most people my age probably would have. But um, I feel like I still have a lot to contribute, and I want to be able to continue to do that.
Hmm.
And I feel like retirement is kind of that first step into the grave, which
Hmm.
I'm not ready to do yet.
I share with that. I just I can't ever see myself retiring. I just that's I can't just do nothing. I have to kind of keep moving.
Right.
Yeah, I share with you. How old a man are you, Steve?
I turned 70 a couple of weeks ago.
My goodness. God bless you. You look freaking great.
Thank you.
You look great. You've got more energy than I have. That's for sure. I'm 55. Wow. And so given that that's your motivation, like you said, the why assessment, the legacy, etc. How do you measure success?
Um, I don't know that I do. I
Mm,
guess is that first thought. And I think the second thought is I keep doing what I've been doing. So I'll give you some external success in terms of the book and speaking, and I'm very well known in my niche of insurance agent technology world. So that's a measure of success, um, certainly for me. I think a better measure is impact. Um, and I would say again, legacy has been a bit of a word that's been running through my brain recently.
mm,
Um, and I think I I haven't told anybody this yet, but here we go. I think I'm gonna. I think another book I'm writing is a history of independent agent technology
mm.
because I've been through it, and I feel like if you'll, I don't know how to say a different word. I have probably need to look for it. But the kids today don't understand where things came from.
Mm.
Meaning, and I mean, the way I phrase it is the state of technology in that industry. There's a reason why it's where it is today. Decisions were made, good or bad, but there are reasons. It's not just we're stupid or we were Luddites or all of that kind of stuff. And having some history there, and I think I'm uniquely positioned to be able to do something like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that may be a new project I'm taking on. We'll see how that discipline works, right?
Very, very cool. Hey, how do you think Jeff Bezos measures success? I mean, certainly anybody would think he's successful from the outside.
Yes.
I know he's remarried. He's got Blue Origin. He's no longer the CEO of Amazon. He's got very much into fitness. We see a remarkable physical difference
Yep.
now. But I wonder how he would measure success.
I based on some comments he's made in interviews, etc. He's I think people would assume he measures it by money,
Yeah, I wouldn't think
right?
so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, being a billionaire.
And he one of the comments he's made is that he won the lottery with Amazon.
Mm,
And I think he measures success with the results of Blue Origin.
Hmm.
Now, think back to that valedictorian address.
Right.
I think that's what he's working toward. And I think the more he works toward that, the more success he has. And he's using his Amazon winnings, if I can call it that, to fund that process.
Wow.
And I think success for him is to have people in space, have industry in space, etc.
And I'm just going to assume, Steve, that all those leadership principles, everything that he created with his team there that we talked about today, has been carried over to Blue Origin.
Yes. Yes, very much so.
Pizza decision making.
I would assume so. There's less visibility into Blue Origin than Amazon in terms of
Yeah.
how that works right now. But I can only assume if it worked at Amazon, it'll work. It does work at Blue Origin.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's so much we can learn from it. And now, has the new CEO, Jassy?
Yeah, Andy Jassy.
Andy Jassy, has he created these memos, these public letters, like?
Well, he's continued the shareholder letters.
Uh-huh.
So Bezos' last one was 2020. So Jassy's written the others. It's interesting. I'm actually starting to think about doing an analysis of his letters versus Bezos, like tone. I'm pretty convinced Bezos wrote all but one of the letters he wrote. I think the 2019 letter, the COVID letter, it had a different tone to it than the other letters. So
Interesting.
And I think he was buried in COVID and Amazon and all of that.
Yeah, it was a terrible time.
But Andy's writing them; they just have a different tone.
I see.
And so I haven't done enough kind of thought, research, analysis to figure that out yet. But yeah, that's interesting.
Well, Steve Anderson, absolute pleasure. I'm so glad you wrote this. I want businesses to thrive, especially small businesses. There's so much that they could learn from these giants in industry, and you kind of collecting this together and putting it in this book format really, really helps. Anybody listening, how can they get in touch with you?
So a couple ways. There's a website for the book called thebezosletters.com, and some information there if you want. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And so usually Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos, maybe I pop up. And if you'd like to connect with me there, let me know you listen to this podcast, and I'd be more than happy to.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. If I'm ever in the greater Tennessee area, I'll make sure to look you up and maybe
That'd
go
be
get
great.
a cup of tea. Yeah.
I'd enjoy it.
Thanks so much, Steve. You have a great day.
Joe, appreciate it. Great conversation. Take care.
Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration.